Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Planetos Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the fans of George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire and HBO's A Game of Thrones. Spoiler warning, this show will cover all material, the main series, Dunk and Egg, the novellas, The World of Ice and Fire, quotes and interviews by George, and episodes of the show and its commentaries and bonus material. I'm one of your hosts, Brett. You can find me on Twitter at HomelyPillow.
And I'm your other host, Travis. You can find me on Twitter at Sir_Travis. We hope you enjoyed today's show. Just a few days ago on his Not a Blog, George dropped a really great excerpt from the upcoming Fire and Blood Volume 1, which releases on November 20th. Now, this is a very interesting section from that book because it deals with arguably two of the best rulers of Westeros. King Jaehaerys I, the Conciliator, the Wise, the Old King, and Queen Alysanne, known as Good Queen Alysanne. Once Fire and Blood releases, I hope we can get a chance here on Planetos Podcast to discuss it more. But today we're going to focus primarily on this excerpt and these two amazing characters, especially Alysanne. So, Brett, did you get a chance to read the excerpt? Did you see it when it was first posted? I think a couple days ago.
Yeah. Well, I saw it. I didn't. Actually, I read it a couple hours ago. Actually, though, for the
Great.
first time. So.
Well, it's very interesting because I think, as we're going to discuss in this episode, there's a lot of interesting foreshadowing following some of the comments and threads on Twitter and Reddit. There's a lot of people who think George was sending messages by picking this excerpt instead of others. But it really got the fan community talking. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So first, we want to give a little bit of background on Jaehaerys and Alysanne. So they are brother and sister, like many Targaryen kings and queens. They end up being the longest reigning monarchs of the Targaryen dynasty. Their grandparents were Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wife, Rhaenys. Their father was Aenys the First, and their mother was Alyssa Velaryon. And, that goes back to our episode on Orain Waters and the historical ties between House Targaryen and House Velaryon. Now, Jaehaerys succeeded his uncle, Maegor I, also known as Maegor the Cruel, and Jaehaerys was the fourth king to sit on the Iron Throne. But it's important to remember that Jaehaerys and Alysanne and their mother, Alyssa Velaryon, were held as hostages and ultimately fled as exiles during Maegor the Cruel's unjust rule. So Jaehaerys eventually returns to Westeros and puts forth his claim and unites the many factions that are opposed to Maegor, and eventually takes the crown following Maegor's mysterious death on the Iron Throne. So it's vital to understand where these two characters begin when they take the seat as king and queen, because they're walking into a Westeros that has been divided in turmoil and cruelty of Maegor's reign, which we will get to read more about once the book releases on November 20th. So you had noble houses rising against Maegor. He tortured and killed his own family members. He killed all the workers who built the Red Keep. He took multiple wives, including Jaehaerys and Alysanne's sister, Rhaena. And Maegor utterly crushed the Faith Militant, the Warrior Sons, and the Poor Fellows, all who were butchered or sent to the wall. So that's the type of realm that Jaehaerys and Alysanne take over. But like we said, they end up becoming the longest rulers of Westeros. So they did a lot of great things, and like we said, they're probably the best rulers that the realm has ever had. So it's again interesting that George chooses this section to give us. So let's talk exactly about what we discover in this section. And then we're going to talk about some takeaways, some foreshadowing, some concepts that we think George has embedded in this section. So the excerpt deals with Jaehaerys and Alysane's planned progress to Winterfell in the north. As it begins, it's been a while since the king and queen have made a royal progress across the realm. Harris has been frustrated with the plans of the past, so he decides that instead of he and his dragon going first and then waiting for the retinue to catch up, he's going to send his Kingsguard and royal party on first on 3 ships that will sail to White Harbor, and the king and the queen on their dragons will meet them there. Now, this doesn't go according to plan because Jaehaerys is asked by the free cities of Pentos and Tyrosh to intercede in their war and to host the parties in King's Landing for peace negotiations. Now, there's a pretty icy Warden of the North waiting at Winterfell, and Alysanne and Jaehaerys and the small council fear that this will elicit a pretty nasty response from Lord Stark. So it's decided that Alysanne will go herself. So the main part of the excerpt really it's actually kind of fun. Let me back up just a minute. It's funny because when people started posting about this thread or about this excerpt on Twitter and on Reddit, they initially said this is a Jaehaerys chapter. And we quickly come to realize that this is focused on Alysanne. And we really find out why she gets the moniker of Good Queen. So she arrives in White Harbor. She's wined and dined by the Manderleys, who put forth a huge spectacle to welcome her and praise her. She convenes a women's court at White Harbor in Lord Manderley's hall, where she listens to the concerns and grievances of women and girls. She arranges marriages for Lord Manderley's sons and daughters. She then travels to Winterfell, where she warms the cold heart of Lord Alaric Stark. Finally, she goes to the Wall, and this is where the excerpt gets very, very interesting. It was of great concern that the royal party would go to the Wall, because remember, a lot of the members of the Night's Watch are made up of poor fellows and warrior sons that had opposed Maegor the Cruel. And then finally, the very last paragraph of the excerpt gives us considerable pause and foreshadowing, because Alysanne's dragon, Silverwing, has a really interesting reaction and displays really tense behavior at the Wall and while flying in the skies above Castle Black. So let's discuss some of the stuff that we learned and loved about this excerpt. So I want to ask a question first. Let's talk about Jaehaerys. Is the conciliator a misnomer for him? Conciliator is basically a peacemaker. It's someone who can step in and really tamp down hostilities, can bring disaffected parties together, reach agreements, rectify terrible situations. So again, someone who can kind of mediate a situation. I think it's interesting that he's known as the old, the wise, the conciliator, which obviously means his long reign saw a peaceful realm, and his ability to negotiate settlements and bring his lords together. But in this excerpt, Pentos and Tyrosh almost go to war in King's Landing. Some Pentoshi guards are killed. The Archon of Tyrosh's ship is burnt at anchor in King's Landing. But this is a small section, right?
Yeah. I mean, it could, if it only applies to this, he's doing a pretty terrible job. But right. he might already have that name, so he might already be known for that. So he might be trying to that might be why they were accepting of that deal and came to King's Landing
Right.
in the first place. So,
Well, and it's important to remember that, he returned to Westeros, put forth his claim, and was preparing to fight his uncle Maegor, and probably overthrow him because he goes to Storm's End. House Baratheon is the first that really raises their banners for him. It's rumored that Lannister and Tully and Aaron are going to join his sides. And now, to be fair, this is written from the perspective of an archmaester. So, even in interviews about this excerpt or about Fire and Blood, George says this is told from a point of view of a certain character. So, sometimes it should be questioned. But there were a lot of people who were unhappy with Maegor, and Jaehaerys was going to bring those together. So that's at least something that from the beginning he was able to do. And like we said earlier, he's the longest monarch of Westeros. This takes place in 58 AC. He takes the throne in 48 AC, and he rules to 103. That's a long period of time. If you weren't that good of a king, you probably wouldn't sit the throne that long.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not. No.
I wonder if he's like the longest ruling to date.
I think so.
Targaryen king.
Yeah, I think so. I think he does. And Alysanne was by his side. I think she dies in 99 or 100 AC. So she was by his side for pretty much the entire time that he was on the throne. So that bodes well that the old, the wise, the conciliator. Those are nicknames that he really earned. And we don't know that. Like we said, this is a section in an excerpt. We don't know. It could go on very easily and explain that Jaehaerys reaches a peace deal between Tyrosh and Planetos.
That's true. That's very true.
Right. Next question I want to ask: why is this the first time that Jaehaerys and Alysanne are going north? Maegor's rule was so bad. The realm was rising up against him. Like we said, this excerpt probably starts about 58 AC or talks about that time frame of 58 AC. Jaehaerys and Alysanne had been on the throne for about 10 years, and this is the first time they can get to the north.
Yeah, that is weird. I wonder if maybe it was winter during that time, or I guess it could be that, or there was some kind of ongoing conflict in the north. I don't know. I doubt the conflict. I feel like the Targaryens would step in, but
well, I think it's interesting to think, like you said, there's got to be a winter at some point that potentially could affect that. We know that distances are extremely far, especially once you get above the neck. In fact, the excerpt itself says that roads beyond the neck were poor and the distances were vast. So that's going to be hard to get up there. I mean, even Robert, his best friend goes back home to Winterfell, and he doesn't even come north.
Oh, yeah, that's
what,
true.
15, 16, 17 years, something like that. So he never even ventures up there.
So George is playing a bit with a dichotomy there. He's reminding us of the difference between the north and the southern kingdoms, not only distance and terrain and weather, but also different customs, a world away, so to speak. That's how the north is viewed to the rest of Westeros.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so now this is a bit of a fun section that we want to talk about. Is George throwing a bit of shade at Game of Thrones with this excerpt? So I just want to point out a few interesting things here that some people picked up on. And the first is, George makes it very clear the North is huge. The distances are extreme, even on the back of a dragon flying. And obviously, people immediately started to think about the episode Beyond the Wall from season 7, where Jon and party go north. Gendry runs back. A raven flies the Dragonstone. Daenerys mounts a dragon, flies north. I mean, there was a lot that happened in that episode, and we obviously, I think, talked about that several episodes ago. That it was hard for me personally to be like, oh my gosh, this is just so much plot moving so fast. But again, the show is coming to an end, and it's got to wrap up some storylines, and so we got to dismiss a bit of our angst about that because they've got to move forward the story. But is George throwing a bit of shade there?
It sounds like a lot of this chapter or excerpt is it is kind of, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's in a fun way, I would say.
Right.
But yeah.
Here's another interesting thing that people could read as George throwing shade. Says to Queen Alysanne that his sons will marry in front of heart trees, and obviously what happens in season 2 is Robb marries Talissa in front of a tree. Actually, I don't think it was a heart tree, but a sept, a southern sept, and officiates the ceremony. So some people have read that and thought, is that kind of George throwing shade that back all the way back to season 2? Of course, George was much more involved in season 2, so potentially maybe he could have spoken and said, maybe don't make it a septon.
Yeah. Maybe
be a little more. Be a little more cryptic there.
Or maybe the King of the North doesn't get married, and then in front of a.
Right. Now, these next two things that we want to talk about I don't think are shade.
So it will be telling when the show ends and the book series ends to go back and see the differences and what rules George lays out in his series that aren't possible to have happened in the show.
Again, we know that Dany flies her dragons beyond the wall, and we're going to talk about this in our last section on this excerpt. But that doesn't appear possible in George's world. There's some reason that dragon will not go over that wall. So again, you can interpret it as shade. Maybe there's maybe that wasn't intended as shade, but it seems like George is going for that being an important plot point.
I think that's probably going to be really important because, before that, there was no reason to think a dragon wouldn't fly past the wall.
Right.
So that's some new information there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's going to be very interesting because, I think I'm in the camp where I think Euron is going to blow the horn that Sam has in Old Town and down the wall, or it's going to be alluded that brings down the wall, almost like he's going to blow it, and then a couple chapters later, you're going to see the wall fall, and how George plays with. He doesn't give you the direct answer. He gives you a couple different possibilities of why this thing came down.
Yeah.
But still, when last season, when this occurred, when a dragon blew down the wall, a lot of people were saying, wow, I heard people say, I never even thought of that. Like, I didn't even think that was a possibility. Perhaps that is how the wall falls.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. This really complicates that going forward.
And I think he put it in there for a reason and chose to show this chapter for a reason. I think
this is more foreshadowing, but it's going to be very interesting to see. Excerpt deals with a Targaryen queen and her dragon visiting Winterfell, and we're going to see that in season 8. We're going to see Daenerys and her dragons and her Dothraki and her Unsullied come to Winterfell. So it's going to be very interesting to see what type of reception she receives and put that in context with what reception Alysanne received, and then the relationships that she built there. And then finally, this is a minor nitpick, but what really struck me was the part of the excerpt where Alysanne sees the wall for the first time, and it kind of takes her breath away. And I talked about this on another episode, that I really wanted to see Dany's reaction to seeing King's Landing for the first time. That's where her family ruled. That's where her family forged the Seven Kingdoms, and we got that great arrival of her at Dragonstone. I mean, it was very
powerful and emotional, but they didn't make that effort for King's Landing.
Nor do we get that for the Wall, and I just think it's kind of interesting that George put in there that Alysanne has this kind of visceral reaction of it takes her breath away when she sees it, because it's supposed to be one of these wonders of Planetos that when you see it, Tyrion does it, Jon does it, other characters do it, that they just kind of stop and their breath is taken away. So that would have been nice to see, although all of that happened in season 7, so I guess Dany would have had like 3 montages of her breath being taken away. So
Yeah.
maybe that wouldn't have worked.
Yeah,
Right.
Maybe if it was 10 episodes. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. You that would have probably been a little better if it was 10 episodes. But we're not here to bash the show. That's not what we're doing. But we can still wish and hope for a few things that we didn't get. All right, Brett. So House Manderley knows how to work it, right?
Yeah.
They're pretty good about their politics.
Yeah, they know how to feast.
Right. Oh, but yeah, they sure know how to feast.
Unlike the phrase.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, the phrase don't know how to feast because they are the feast. Oh, you need to like put a little.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know what the sound is, but anyways.
Yeah.
So tens of thousands turn out to welcome Queen Alysanne, and actually the excerpt says Lord Manderley is surprised by that. I think that's more, he's just surprised that all of these people have come from across the north to see her. And then obviously, like you said, he has these lavish festivities. He throws a small tournament. He has these huge feasts. He's marrying off sons and daughters. He's placing other members of his family in the Queen's own party. So it's probably something that we could see the Manderleys do in the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring if they survive.
I didn't even think about that. Like, which I wonder if that's one of the things, like maybe the show maybe possibly got from the books, like that kind of didn't translate super well. Jon and Dany riding in a ship together to White Harbor, and then going to Winterfell from there.
Yeah,
which really, like, it seems like that just seems like something maybe they got from a note and didn't really know exactly how to use it. But
yeah, it's interesting because poor Quentin Emmett kind of postulates that Alysanne is sort of a parallel for Sansa, and that he thinks that the likelihood of the most logical place for Sansa to take the Knights of the Vale is probably not up through Moat Cailin, but instead sailing from Galltown to White Harbor, and kind of like a conquering hero returning with this vast army at her back, ready to take the north. And so he postulates that on Twitter, and it was a very interesting thread that he throws out there. So perhaps that's that's where the showrunners got what I hope we see next season is Jon and Dany arriving in White Harbor. Although I could kind of see them skipping that and just kind of arriving at Winterfell in the first episode just to move everything along.
Man,
but I really hope
Yeah,
Yeah, I hope we get to see White Harbor.
yeah, it'd be really cool to see White Harbor.
Yeah, because we definitely need more of Lord Manderley. I mean, the guy in the show who played Lord Manderley doesn't look anything like him, but I actually kind of like that actor. I mean, he looked pretty cool. He had that
silver white hair and short white beard that sort of reminded me of a trident, like the Manderley's sigil represents.
looked like he could, you
Hmm.
know, cut a few people. I think he was just in season 6 in the Winds of Winter, the final episode.
I didn't even know they included the Manderleys.
Yeah, so it's at the part where Lyanna Stark, Jesus, Lyanna Mormont chastises everyone, and she's going to have Lord Serwyn and Lord Glover, and she also attacks Lord Manderley. So Lord Glover is the first one to raise his sword and declare Jon King of the North, but then Lord Manderley joins in as well. So yeah, so he was there for a brief appearance, and I remember him. I thought he was a good character, and actually some of the spoilers from season 7 seem to suggest that he would be back, but he wasn't in season 7 that I remember.
Wow. Yeah, I don't remember him unless he was just sitting in that room or something.
Right. So speaking of Sansa, so if Sansa is the parallel for Queen Alysanne, then Erlac Stark is fucking Stannis Baratheon. Like,
yeah.
George
he sounds exactly like Stannis.
George is like, here, let me copy and paste everything about Stannis Baratheon into this character. It's great. I mean, it was really great to see Twitter and Facebook and Reddit blow up that, holy shit, this is guy's Stannis Baratheon.
Yeah. Like I looked at the notes first that you had written, and then I went back through and like I saw that, and I was like, okay, now I'm kind of interested in reading through this whole thing, and when I did, I was like, oh yeah, he sounds exactly like Stannis. Like,
Yeah, he's, when we first meet Stannis in A Clash of Kings, he's going on and on about the fact that Storm's End wasn't given to him and he was passed over, and now Renly is rising up. Well, when we meet Arlac Stark, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I think I am. He's still focused on. He would be Torrhen Starks, the king who knelt. He would be like his great grandson or great great grandson. Anyways, but he's focusing back on the fact that the kings of winter, the kings of the north, knelt to the Targaryens. He's got what's described as a flinty reputation. That's very similar to the way Donald Noy describes Stannis as iron, that he'll break before he bends. And of course, the excerpt says that Lord Stark is a prickly, hard man, stern and unforgiving, tight-fisted almost to the point of being stingy. He's humorless, he's joyless, he's cold. And actually, Lord Manderley says to Queen Alysanne that is respected but not loved. And that's all of that absolutely describes Stannis. But
yeah,
it's great that the excerpt goes on to say that the longer she's at Winterfell, Queen Alysanne realizes that Arlac isn't the way people describe him. Yeah, he's frugal. Yes, he's careful and he's cautious. He's blunt. His humor, it's described that it has a sharp edge to it. It's like a knife.
that's
And there's
well, that's what made me think of Stan. Well, like the whole description is Stannis,
Right.
but yeah,
Right.
the humor thing is like Stannis kind of comes across as like he doesn't have humor, but then the
Right.
more you go through his chapters with him in it, I mean, they're hilarious. Like,
Yeah. One of the two of the very earliest podcast episodes I listened to were History of Westeros and Radio Westeros had
one of them had something called like the wit and wisdom of Stannis Baratheon, and then someone said something was like the untold humor or something like that. But it was funny. They just analyzed his wisdom, but also his wit, and that it was an unknowing wit, not an unknowing wit, but just his bluntness is, like you said, is so sharp, and it's just like a whip that just hits so hard that you're just left with you have to laugh at it.
I think we mentioned that in like our first or second episode.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, I'm sure we did. And of course, just like Stannis, the people around him love Lord Stark. So his family loves him. His castle guards love him. His soldiers in Winterfell, and that's kind of like Stannis too. That the people around him, especially like Davos, really love him, and the men that serve him are loyal to him. So I think it's just great that we get a bit of a Stannis Baratheon here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's another very interesting parallel that's used pretty effectively in here, and that is we have a Knight of the Laughing Tree in this excerpt. So I'm going to read this quote from the excerpt. Manderley also staged a small tourney in the Queen's honor to show the prowess of his knights. One of the knights, though no knight, was revealed to be a woman, a wildling girl who had been captured by rangers north of the wall and given to one of Lord Manderley's household knights to foster. Delighted by the girl's daring, Alysanne summoned her own sworn shield, Jonquil Dark, and the wildling and the Scarlet Shadow dueled spear against sword, whilst the Northmen roared in approval. Now, the Knight of the Laughing Tree is supposedly Lyanna Stark at the tournament at Harrenhal. It's part of the reason that perhaps Rhaegar fell in love with her, that she was daring to do this because Aerys actually, took it as an affront that this knight who was whose face was covered would not show him or herself to the Mad King. And actually, I think he orders Rhaegar to find out who it is, and then there's no knowledge if Rhaegar found out, and obviously then Rhaegar and Lyanna disappear together.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just a very interesting parallel that George uses here.
It's kind of cool because that is like the Jonquil from the the Florian the Fool tell or whatever.
Oh, I don't know. That could be. Yeah. Well, it could be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think that's definitely something that we're going to talk about here in a minute because again, think of Alysanne as Sansa, and Jonquil is a female sworn sword to Alysanne in this excerpt. And I just like her name, the Scarlet Shadow. I like that. That's pretty cool.
Sounds like the Scarlet Witch or whatever.
Yeah, something like that. Absolutely. So I'm going to steal a line from Eliana of Girls Gone Canon here. It's not good Queen Alysanne, it's great Queen Alysanne. I mean, she seems to be a very, very powerful, smart, capable ruler who really wins over people. I mean, she wins over the small folk and the highborn alike on this trip to the north. She secures allies through marriage alliances. She asks women to step forward and voice their ideas and their concerns. She breaks that icy exterior of Erlac Stark. She warms not only him, but also his vassals to him in a way, because it's said that, again, that he wasn't loved, he was respected. And so I think her kind of opening him up helps him in his future rule of the North. She shows the Night's Watch that they're valued. Again, like we said, she has that female sworn sword, the Scarlet Shadow, Jonquil Dark. And like you said, Brett, Sansa.
The songs and stories of Jonquil and Florian
are very important to Sansa early in A Song of Ice and Fire. And then I really like this because I'm a fan of this movie and these historical figures. George describes Alysanne as the Eleanor of Aquitaine of Westeros. and to picture her as Katharine Hepburn's portrayal in The Lion in Winter. And if you don't know anything about Eleanor of Aquitaine, watch The Lion in Winter. It's Peter O'Toole and Katharine Hepburn as King Henry II and Queen Eleanor. I think who plays? Oh, Anthony Hopkins. Young Anthony Hopkins plays one of their sons. I think it's Richard maybe, but she's the mother of Richard the Lionheart and King John, who are obviously very famous in history and in historical and fictional stories like Robin Hood. But she was a very, very, very powerful woman. She
lived a long time, and she arranged many marriages.
She actually supported one of her sons in a coup against her husband, and she's actually imprisoned at one point and brought back to court by Henry II. But it's just a really that's a high regard to compare her to Eleanor of Aquitaine, which means she's very important to the history of Westeros and to the Targaryen dynasty.
She's the one that gives the gift, right?
Right.
Okay.
And that's actually something interesting. I don't remember who I saw talking about this. The gift, the new gift, is something that really pisses the Starks off. And remember back to us talking about Arlac Stark. She has a lot of goodwill with him. She warms him. He begins to like her. He takes her on a hunt. He shows her. The excerpt says,
he shows her the bones of a giant and lets her use the modest Winterfell library and really begins to warm to her and like her.
And so her deciding that, someone said it like this, that it was probably a very hard policy decision that she made, because again, if she's an Eleanor of Aquitaine, she is very smart politically. She knows how to work people. She knows what to say and what to do to win people over. So it's interesting that she makes this decision, and whether she was unaware that they would have this reaction, I don't think she would. I mean, we're talking about her being very smart and very capable. So that's interesting.
Well, I think too, I mean, you get from the end of this chapter, her dragon not wanting to fly past the wall worries her, so that could really freak her out and make her push to strengthen the Night's Watch. And
that's a good point.
Giving that. Yeah. Is it it's the new gift?
Yeah, so it says that it was the new gift.
Okay.
Alysanne thought the Night's Watch was so brave that she convinced Jaehaerys to double the amount of land held by the Black Brothers. Lord Stark indeed donated the land, which was renamed the new gift, to the Night's Watch, although the Starks were not glad to do so. Lord Stark's own brother even
sent letters to the Citadel asking
for precedence against forced donation of property. As such, it was said at the time that the Starks were bitter about having been forced to part with the land, and Maester Yandel believes that this might have influenced Lord Ellard Stark's choice of support during the Great Council of 101 AC. So that's interesting.
It's interesting that the Starks were like really mad about that.
Right. So now let's talk about the most important takeaway from this excerpt, and that is that final section. Alysanne says, Silverwing does not like this wall. It's summer, the wall is weeping,
yet there is a chill in the air.
And whenever the wind blew, the dragon would hiss and snap. I mean, you can just see a dragon like hissing and snapping, just kind of turning around looking like, like there's something in the air that it senses.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, Alysanne tries to take Silverwing 3 times beyond the wall. And every time the dragon veers back south and refuses to go. And when she lands, she laughs it off in front of the Night's Watch, so it doesn't give them pause. It doesn't concern them. But she says in a letter to Jaehaerys, this is the first time Silverwing hasn't done what I wanted her to do. And in fact, the very last line, which I think is really eerie, it troubled me then and it troubles me still. So there's something there. So I want to ask this question, and let's wrap up this episode on this question.
Okay.
Is the wall a barrier that the dragon cannot cross, or does the dragon sense something north of the wall that scares it?
Ooh, that's a good question. It sounds like there's something that is scaring it. But then again, I mean, it could be that magical barrier of the wall instead of maybe the others or the undead or whatever's out there that well, it's probably the others, obviously. I don't know what else it would be, but I don't know. That's a good question. I'm gonna say it probably senses something, but
okay. So you're gonna go with it senses something. You know, I'm gonna cheat and I'm gonna say both because I think I probably lean more toward there's some magic to it that's causing it not to be able to cross. But I think George in this excerpt sets it up that it could be either. I mean, he's a master of that.
Oh yeah, he probably.
What sticks out to me is that line, to jump back, is that the dragon, every time the wind blew, the dragon would hiss and snap. Now, that's almost like it's sensing something. Now we know that the wind in George's stories, can carry whispers. It can carry ravens and blood. There's all those points of where people can hear words on the wind. So maybe it's that, but that just makes me think. Like if your dog is beside you and all of a sudden it hears something, it kind of goes crazy that you don't hear. You always say, well, she's hearing something that I can't. She's sensing something that I don't understand. They have a different range of hearing, but in a mystical way that like Westeros, this dragon could be sensing something. So I think that there's absolutely, the excerpt is saying the dragon is sensing something. On the other hand, we've seen time and again in the main series that there are beings and creatures that cannot cross the wall. Cold Hands cannot go beyond the wall. Now, whether he specifically can't go beyond the wall because it's a barrier, or whoever is controlling him only allows him to go to that point, I don't know.
Yeah.
The Whites that Jon and the Night's Watchman find in a Game of Thrones north of the wall and bring back, they're then activated. Something is controlling them on the opposite side of the wall. But it's also stated that wargs have a hard time. So when their animal is on the opposite side, it's hard for them to communicate with that animal. I don't know. But, another character that's kind of interesting is, and, I don't think this, again, maybe she is a unreliable narrator. Melisandre says the wall is giving her powers, that her powers are stronger, that she feels more. She doesn't need these potions and these powders anymore. So if it's a barrier to magic, how is she stronger there? Or is that Melisandre just, selling a load of BS? I think it's hard because we get a point of view of her in A Dance with Dragons, so she believes she's getting stronger there. Again, like we just said, that could be unreliable. But if it's a barrier, maybe it should be stopping her. I mean, again, we're talking about crossing here.
Yeah, well, and you got to think too. In the main series, the dragons are back, so magic is stronger. So that could just be her having more abilities because whatever the dragons are doing, or
that's true,
or however the magic is getting stronger. I don't know, but it could just be that.
But that's a great point, because we think of this as the past when there's really nothing happening. In fact, the sensing something beyond the wall. This is a period of history where there doesn't seem to be really any activity of the others or the undead or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But like you just said, dragons exist, so they could be enhancing the power of the wall as a magical barrier. It could be even stronger then, and then that's why the dragon's not able to cross it or senses something or whatever. So I think it's just a very interesting, what's the truth here? And, I think by the time we get A Dream of Spring, whenever, Claire is 18 and she's 9 months right now. So when she's 18 years old and A Dream of Spring comes out, maybe I'll be alive and able to, we'll come back and say, remember that time we discussed this? No, seriously, it's just one of those things that it could be either way. And I love that there's some ambiguity to that question.
Oh yeah.
So I know we said we were going to end on the wall and Silverwing, but let's consider just two more points quickly. This excerpt is very well written and has a lot of depth to it. It very much shows that character moments can be packed into these historical stories by George. And it also shows that he is really trying to flesh out his world, and his passion for the material is as strong as ever. And, if this excerpt is any indication of what awaits us in Fire and Blood Volume 1, I think we're in for a really good book come November.
I totally agree, especially with the last part of that excerpt. That really sold me on the book.
Yeah, definitely.
And there might be a lot more of that in there. So,
yeah, that's another thing we can consider. What this goes from Aegon the First to Aegon the Third. Supposedly, there's going to be a ton of stuff in this book. That if it has as much depth as this one excerpt does, we may be spending months combing through it and figuring out, what does this mean for season 8? What does this mean for the show? What does this mean for the end game? What type of rules is George laying down that we may not know for years to come?
Ooh. Yeah, but
so basically, all the years that everyone's been spending in this fandom, it's worth it because you might as well buckle up because we've got years to go.
Oh.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to Fire and Blood. I've already pre-ordered it when it first became available for pre-order, but now I'm really excited.
When does it come out? I actually wasn't too excited about it, but now I don't know. After this and reading that, I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll get it.
Yeah, November 20th.
All right, November.
So
okay, cool.
6 weeks from now or so.
So hopefully I'll be able to find a copy pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening. You can find us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter at planetospodcast. You can listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, YouTube, and any other platform that supports the RSS feed. Please rate and review us on any of those. Well, I guess you can't really rate us on Twitter, but any place you can rate us or review us, just please do that. That helps us out and helps people find us. Email us at planetospodcast@gmail.com if you have any questions or ideas or critiques or whatever, anything. I'm one of your hosts, Brett.
And I'm your other host, Travis. See you around Planetos.